Hello Internet, it's your favorite purple spinning thief with a wrench and a rat. As I'm sure some of you are aware, long before Sony had become the video game juggernaut company they have today, they were originally in cahoots with Nintendo to create a new joint console known as the SNES PlayStation. The partnership was originally a fruitful one, and journalists reported the two teams had got along exceptionally well. Imagine if this deal had worked out. We could have had the PlayStation Nintendo Switch, or abbreviated, it would read as PNOY. To make a long story short, basically the two teams ended up having major disagreements on how the licensing and profits of the system were going to go. This eventually led the Sony executives behind closed doors to be like, hey, let's just release the product, make all the money, then leave the guys over there with nothing and scram. But the door wasn't closed all the way because it was actually Luigi. Yes, no, I'm not making that up. Heard the whole thing and went back to Nintendo and said,
they're going to screw us over, so what we should do is go get the Philip guys to make us a worse system, but don't tell them spaghetti ravioli mamma mia.
So Nintendo made a deal with the company Philip, which brings us to the year 1991. PlayStation goes to the Consumer Electronics Show and says, "What's up, gamers?" Then go on to tell the crowd they're going to be partnering with Nintendo to make a new video game console.
24 hours later.
In any case, you know this, you call yourself Lord of Thunder, God of Thunder.
I've never met this man in my life.
So pretty reasonably, the two split ways after that. But that's not to say the PlayStation never forgot about their roots. Around this generation of gaming, there was a rivalry to contest the greatest matchups of all time. Coke versus Pepsi, Marvel versus DC, my dad versus my career. I'm telling you, Dad, it's gonna take off, I swear! What we were looking for was Mario versus Sonic. The feud had been going on for a few years up to this point, and consumers' eyes were glued to the two as they were both fighting each other for the king of the platformer genre, launching some seriously aggressive ad campaigns against one another. However, in 1994, the gap between these two grew much larger as Super Mario 64 hit the scene. What? Platforming? In 3 dimensions? What, are you gonna walk outside showing your shoulders next? The fans couldn't comprehend what they were seeing. And what was Sega's breakout 3D game?
Click on me for help.
Needless to say, the race wasn't exactly close up to this point. Nintendo was on top of the world. Not only were they beating Sonic in this war, but they were lapping around him. But word travels quick in the industry, and their old pals at Sony caught wind. 3D platforming, huh? Seems like they might just have the idea for their new console mascot. They were ready to show their old pals at Nintendo exactly what they had lost. They had made some enemies, and they were going to show them how powerful they really were. Some of you might have caught on at this point, but I grew up as a Nintendo kid. This might have become evident by the fact that when I went over all the franchises I had ever beaten, 12 of them were Nintendo games, and 2 of them weren't really Nintendo, but they were played on Nintendo consoles. So while my time with the other consoles were limited, I did get to play some of these PlayStation games when I was a kid, and luckily they were the 2 poster children for the PlayStation platformers, Crash and Spyro. So which ones do I remember playing? Yep, for some reason, the games we had on our home little console for about a year were the 2 worst in their franchises. So why do I bring this all up? Well, as you can probably tell from the title of this video, today we are going to continue our journey of trying to beat one game of every video game franchise. I'm going to be playing through and beating one game of every PlayStation platformer. Though really quick, I'd like to elaborate on a point that I tried to make clear during the last video, but I didn't do the best job explaining. The element of this series that makes it the most fulfilling for me, and what I can imagine makes it entertaining for most of you, is the fact that I have absolutely zero nostalgia for most of these games. I'm going in as a blank slate in most cases, and I won't be judging with rose-tinted glasses. And I find that it's really important for this video in particular because most of the people I see talking about these games nowadays are extremely nostalgic for them. And I think in that same vein, there's a lot of people who want to see new people play it and give fresh perspectives on it, without judging these games through rose-tinted glasses. So here we are. Like the rest of the videos in this series, the same rules apply. I recommend you checking out the first part of this series to get the full scoop, but in summary, the main rules are: number 1, each franchise must have 3 or more games in their series. Sorry, Croc, the only shoe you're getting today is the boot. Number 2, each franchise must be generally recognizable, aka must be somewhat considered famous or popular in the gaming community. This isn't really dictated on awards, but just some common consensus I've seen online, which means this is the rule that is probably going to have the most amount of discussion in the comments. And finally, 3. I only have to beat one game from these for the purposes of this video. This series is meant for me to explore some of the most notorious video game franchises, and if I were going to try to beat every game in every franchise, this would never get done. All I ask is you be a little bit patient with me. I know these titles can be a little bit clickbaity, and trust me, I'd really like to talk about all the games and all these franchises at some point, but I'm a really small YouTuber that has to do a little bit of clickbait with videos like these. It's the only way that I get found. I'm of course going to miss some PlayStation platformers, but I just wanted to talk about some of the main ones. I mean, look, I even tried to buy them all physically. I couldn't really find Crash online for a reasonable price though, within my budget, so these are what we're gonna have to do with. Luckily, I have a unique copy of Spyro though, so we're all good on that front. And make sure to smash that subscribe button and follow me on Twitter! So without further delay, let's saddle up, get ready to nab a boatload of fruits, gems, and bolts, because we're going to beat every PlayStation platformer. Kind of. It comes as a surprise to few that when the term PlayStation platformer gets brought up, both Crash and Spyro are two of the first faces you think of. Which is why I know it might be a little weird that I'm covering both these games in the same section, but I have very similar feelings about both of them, so I think it makes the most sense to cover them all together. Because of how much we have to talk about, we're going to be covering these games in sections, starting off with their stories. Spyro the Dragon was released for the PlayStation in 1998 and was published by Insomniac Games. This was actually only the second game that the company ever made, with the first one being a game called Disruptor, which flopped commercially, but it got some pretty good reviews, which was enough to impress Universal Interactive Studios. The two teams went back and forth on the direction of the game. They always knew they wanted the protagonist to be a dragon, but they weren't sure on what tone the game should take. For a while, it was going to be much darker and grittier, and take after from a film called Dragonheart. But Universal Studios stepped in and told them to make it a bit more kiddie and child-friendly, as that market of video game sales were being heavily dominated by Nintendo. So after a few years of development, Spyro the Dragon finally came out. You play as the youngest dragon in the tribe, Spyro, as you run around nabbing gems, eggs, and your dead relatives in the pursuit of taking down this fella Nasty Nork. You're peeved with him because he caught your family live tweeting about him and then hit them with the "don't care, didn't ask, you're dead now." Luckily enough, Spyro, being the youngest dragon, was missed by the cancel culture. He's too young to have a Twitter, and is sent on a PR mission to uncancel all of his pals, except for JoeFredrick 3 on Twitter, because whoa, he has a Twitter and wants followers, and that's it? Isn't that great? Now, on the other side of the spectrum, Crash Bandicoot was released in September 1996, 2 years prior to Spyro the Dragon, and was developed by Naughty Dog. Crash might be the most iconic out of the bunch of these games we're playing today. And while this might be my first romp with the Orange Freak, I have been a devout Cat Icarus fan since 2014. I mean, look at it, we're even going to get pancakes together, with Gerard and Anthony no less. Hey, while you're here, and I know you were already going to Twitter to follow me from that gag a minute ago, make sure you tweet out at AntDude in specific, "Thank you for paying at JoeFredrick 3's pancakes." I know Gerard, Catty, and I would super appreciate it. Anyways, Crash Bandicoot is the only game I'm going to be covering today where I'm not starting with the first title, just because I know so much about this game franchise at this point. And everything I've ever heard online says that the first two games are really good, but a lot of people think 3 is the peak, so I figured it's not a story-driven game as much as the others are, so why not? And besides, the development section of Crash 3 is going to be wildly different from any of the others we cover, because it's already an established franchise at this point. And I feel like it goes without saying that of all the games we're going to talk about today, Crash Bandicoot has easily left the biggest impact on the industry. However, that didn't stop this game from having a pretty rushed development cycle. The team was only given $2 million and about 10.5 months to finish the third game. But that really didn't stop them from knocking this one out of the park. We pick up from the events of Crash 2, where Cortex is being bullied by a mean tree with a face about how much of a spoiled lemon he is. And when life gives you spoiled lemons, you make the fabric of times and space your chew toy by bringing in entropy to actually do something competent for the first time in 3 games. So it's up to Willy the Wombat and crew to go through through space and time, spinning, winning, and jigging to put an end to Cortex and crew yet again. As for how these two games are played, they're a lot more similar than one might think out the gate. At their core, they're both 3D platformers with a focus on traversal and collecting. For Crash, your objective in each level is, like said prior, getting from point A to point B. That is a terribly written sentence, but with the added gameplay element that only the PlayStation could provide: boxes. Woo, yeah! Give it up for crates, huh? Crates, 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 crates! Players are incentivized to break as many crates throughout the level, awarding you gems you need for that 100% completion. Most crates can be found out in the open, but there's a variety of different types of crates to make this a little bit more engaging. Getting all boxes in a level can make for a pretty decent challenge, but it isn't incredibly difficult or cheap that you feel like the game is being unfair. It always feels like it's in your control. Another element of the box breaking mechanics are the power-ups. At the end of each world, you'll go up against a member of Cortex's crew. When you defeat them, you'll get a handful of power-ups, such as a powered-up belly flop to break metal crates, the death tornado spin that can be used in the air to float, a double jump to increase your air mobility even further, and my personal favorite, the fruit bazooka. These all can be used to make the collecting aspect of traversing levels and getting boxes much easier, especially the bazooka, as it can be used to hit boxes and enemies safely from afar. Then finally, what most fans of the franchise consider the core challenge of these games, the time trial relics. Once you've beaten the game, you unlock the final power-up, the Crash Dash boots. You can now return to any level prior in the game and be met with a new time trial version of the stage, which is where you have to make a dash toward the ends of the level while spinning these time crates to pause the timer for a few seconds, all in the attempt of getting the gold or platinum relic time. And I did not do these. I fully understand I'm probably missing out a chunk of the true Crash 3 experience, but I personally just wanted to move on to the next game on my list so I could get this video out sooner. I'm really sorry, Crash fans. I promise to do better by you in the future. Lord knows we can't have another Fatal Fury incident on our hands. Out the gate, King of Fighters, or Fatal Fury, depending on who you're asking.
Yeah! What is it? An angry mob! In times of crises, intellectuals are always the first to go!
Meanwhile, for Spyro, most of the levels in the game follow the same structure. You're still playing in fairly linear stages, but the level design is more open and allows for more creativity in its level design, giving players more room to explore. But eventually you'll get to the exit portal, then leave. Each stage, however, has plenty to do, such as collecting all the gems, defeating enemies, breaking chests, etc. You also can look for these little dragon eggs that these blue bastards have stolen and scurry around the map with. These can be a good deal of fun to collect, since it's less like you're chasing something down and more like you're trying to figure out a little pathing puzzle, finding ways to cut time and catch up with a little flare blitz to the bastard into the ground, which by the end of this Looney Tunes run should leave the eggs like this, but somehow leave them up like this. Where the two mainly differ is Spyro was a lot more open in its level design, leaving the game feel more like a scavenger hunt, while Crash Bandicoot has more of a focus on tight platforming. Another trait the two share are occasional different play styles to mix up the formula. For Spyro, this would be his speedway stages, where you have full control over his flight and must complete a variety of tasks around the map before time runs out. And Crash's vehicle section, such as his motorcycle races and skiing levels. Spyro would also dip his toes a bit in multiple playable characters for unique stages and future installments, but for his first game, it's just these two types. Both games also have cute little ways to make their games feel even more alive and immersive. Crash Bandicoot 3 will occasionally have the world's bosses pop up in before each level to taunt Crash. While in Spyro, the way you get from level to level is by running around an even bigger hub level, and these have their own collectibles and goodies to snatch up as well. However, these games both leave me feeling a bit underwhelmed. Now don't misunderstand, I think both of these games are wonderful. The music and animations are all done so well to make the worlds feel unique and alive. The platforming is really tight, and the small amount of characters these games do have are very unique and colorful. There are just a few things these games do that keep them closer to the middle of the list for me. For starters, with Spyro, my experience can basically be chalked up by I was just having such a terrible time trying to get the controls and camera to work for me with Spyro. It just feels a little too close to Spyro, which can leave me feeling somewhat claustrophobic when I'm trying to run around and navigate these huge open levels trying to find every little collectible. While I don't hear too many people talking about this in their reviews, when trying to look up the work around the camera, it turns out a lot of other players were having the same troubles as me. Some were even saying the camera was better in the original games, and this was a reignited trilogy thing. So much so, I learned learned that there's a fan-made mod for the PC version that zooms out the camera. But not only was I playing on the PS4, but I also wasn't going to influence the game at all to keep things as clean for the review as possible. On top of the camera, I also just found the dashing really uncomfortable. Not only does it zoom in the camera even more so, but the turning is just a bit clunkier than desired and adds this intense motion blur effect. I know now we can toggle the motion blur off, but at the launch, the game didn't have this option. So it was cool they came back and patched it in later. Had I disabled the motion blur, I could have taken in the level themes a bit more, which were super varied and gorgeous to look at. The varying level themes is also something I think Crash did really well. I know the first two games had a huge focus on jungle and temple aesthetics, but the third game kind of takes you across the world and time itself, so I'm gonna give the point to that, giving you plenty of unique settings for him to explore through. But speaking of him, my gripes with Crash are much more minimal in comparison to Spyro. Anything I could really think to complain about, I feel like the internet has already had covered. The only main problems I had while playing Crash were just some of the vehicle sections were really annoying to control. But I know that's something the Insane trilogy got wrong, not the original game, so take that with a grain of salt. I didn't really have any major problems with either of them, but neither of them really did anything too crazy for me. I'm more inclined to like Spyro's level design more than Crash, but the Bandicoot just had tighter platforming and a much more focused and refined experience. I think the highs are higher for Spyro, but there's not as many lows for Crash Bandicoot. I think the main reason I wanted to lump these two together is because I just think the reason I feel about them is the same. They both are wonderful platformers and deserve to be highly praised as they are, and they both deserve to be thrust back into the limelight. But I just personally have played other platformers in recent years that have done a better job hooking me with their identity, themes, and playstyles, some of which are coming up on the list. Are these games bad? Far from it. Am I in a rush to play them again or crossing my fingers for any sequels? Maybe. I'd love to see the fans get more of these games, and maybe I'll appreciate these games more over time. But for now, they're alright. They're both going to go into the C tier, Spyro below Sonic Mania and Crash above it. This is a really powerful C tier with a lot of really passionate people behind them. I'm sorry if it feels like I'm rushing through these two games. I ran a poll while making this video, and I know a lot of people were excited to see my take on Crash Bandicoot. I just personally found it really hard for me to talk about these games considering how much has already been said, especially since I didn't really have any passionate feelings going one way or another. I just thought they were fine. Good even. I even wrote a version of this script where I wrote out full reviews of Crash and Spyro, but I just felt like I was repeating myself and what I had to say wasn't that interesting. So I felt like it would be better if I just tackled them both at the same time because a lot of my thoughts overlaid each other to make the video a bit more snappy. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and if you're still interested in what I have to say, I guess I can always follow this up in maybe some YouTube shorts or something. But in the meantime, we're gonna be sneaking right into our next title, Sly Cooper. Around the time the PlayStation 2 had released, both Spyro and Crash had fallen into an interesting position, with their original teams now moving on to other projects, leading their fourth installments being interesting. It was time for a new age of grittier and more story-driven platformers, with the turn of the century and the focus of these characters becoming less about wacky and colorful animals, but more gritty and epic cool guys. Yeah! Sex is awesome! Like Spyro and Crash, I would be remiss to say that I have absolutely zero experience with the game. I rented PlayStation Now back in 2018 to play through the original trilogy, but due to how poor the streaming was, I eventually put it down. But I remember getting decently far into the game and enjoying it. So after resubscribing to PlayStation Now and hoping for the best, what did I think? Adam, let's just get this out of the way right now. Sly Cooper is sneaking his way into the B tier. I honestly am not too sure how controversial it is to put him over Crash and Spyro, but I personally just found a lot to love about Sly Cooper, and it's to the point I'm a bit perplexed as to why I don't hear more about these games. So the story goes that you play as Sly Cooper, the only remaining member of the infamous Cooper lineage of thieves. At a young age, a group of criminals known as the Fearsome Five break into his house and kill his parents, holy shit, and steal all the pages of his family's diary, the Thievius Raccoonus. I wonder how they got that name. So Sly, now an orphan, grows up honing his thief skills while becoming great friends with two other kids at the orphanage. Bentley, a genius hacker turtle, and Murray, the goofy getaway driver of the group. The three of them set out on their journey to travel around the world tracking down the Fearsome Five in pursuit of the pages of the Thievius Raccoonus. But not without being trailed by a cop by the name of Carmelita Fox, often failing to catch Sly in time, but is willing to pick up the scraps of the thieves Sly takes down in the end of each world. And let me tell you, when these two are fighting, the sparks are flying, okay? Because Woo boy! Holy shit, she wants this rat dead! You play as the titular Sly as you run through levels I would say fall somewhere between Crash and Spyro on the dimensional planes. While they aren't as open-ended as some Spyro levels can be, they aren't as directly corridor-locked as Crash's can be. Your goal is to get from point A to point B collecting coins, knocking out guards, and most importantly, nabbing as many of these little notes in bottles called clues. Once you collect every bottle in a level, you will be able to unlock a giant vault, usually located near the end of the level. Inside these vaults are the pages of the Thievius Raccoonus. Every time you obtain one of these pages, you unlock a new power-up to add to your moveset. These can range as mobility options such as the roll or dive attack, or even more spy-specific gadgets such as the hat mine or the decoy stand. Then other times you'll get enhancements on some of these moves, like adding a ground pound to the dive move, or an electric field to your roll attack. Then finally there are some passive upgrades you can get, such as floor plans for specific worlds that allow you to upgrade your goggles to locate other clues, or others that are just generally really helpful all the time, such as immunity to water damage. The fact that they made the rewards for completing these levels so substantial really incentivized me to fully complete them. It made me excited to see what new move I was going to be able to add to my arsenal. Having access to such a large variety of thief skills and maneuvers really makes you feel like you're in the game. Which, by the way, this game absolutely destroys its aesthetic from both form and function. Going back to the level structure for a minute, these are some of the most inspired and memorable levels I've played up to this point. Most of these stages honestly don't feel like they come out of a linear platformer, but make you actually feel like you're running around these locations in Sly's world. Some that come to immediate mind are some of the casino levels where you're running around overhead lights and bobbing and weaving between game tables, or the numerous rooftop levels where you're bouncing and leaping across fire escapes and window awnings. The levels in this game just feel so damn inspired and fun, and they managed to keep that up with the bosses. None of them really blew me away as I felt like they were just standard platformer procedure for most of the time, but they had a decent variety and challenge. Some being platform-based, some being puzzle-based, others being an incredibly easy rhythm game. I don't really know how this one fit into the group. I'm actually really pissed at how easy this boss was for me. Back when I played this game in 2018, this was the fight that made me so angry I rage quit and put the game down, swearing that PlayStation Now input delay was just so horrible, I could never do it in time. Maybe the servers were worse, or maybe I've gotten better, but this was pretty cathartic to beat. I got it on my first try. Liar! Well, second try. The first try actually kind of caught me off guard a little bit. I had the jitters, okay? Although my absolute favorite boss out of the group was this Kung Fu Panda. Coming at ya! Sony, I think DreamWorks might want a word with you.
I figured it out. Skadoosh.
He spends the beginning of the fight lobbing these Molotovs at you, so I thought maybe the gimmick of this fight was going to be that I had to get him to break everything in the map, but no. All I had to do was run up and beat the shit out of him. You know how refreshing it was to just fight the boss with my actual attacks? This was super cathartic considering he, murdered hundreds of people. I also think part of Sly's success was how many notes they took from both Crash and Spyro. There's a lot of little things in this game that I can really see where the inspiration stemmed from. You have the open HUD levels with little collectibles to explore to get between levels from Spyro. And the bosses of each world will actively antagonize Sly in the middle of the level over loudspeakers. Which could have been directly inspired from the Crash 3 loading screen taunts. Sly also had a plethora of vehicle sections to change up the gameplay formula, more so than I played in Spyro or Crash 3. And while I found the bike sections in Crash to be a bit of a nuisance due to their controls, I found almost all the vehicle sections here to be super fun, and none of them ever drag on long enough that it becomes a chore. These were so reliable, in fact, that the majority of the final world are these sections alone, as you encroach closer and closer to the final boss of the game, the Vulture?
Hey, Pedro.
There's honestly just so many little things about this game that give me that warm and cozy feeling. The plinky plonky noise of Sly's walk, the level themes and how you go about traversing them, the personality of our main cast, the voice acting, and while the music doesn't stick out to me as of writing this, it fits the atmosphere of the experience really well. This game honestly was just such a joy from start to finish, and from the little I've heard about it online, I've heard it only gets better from the first game onward. I honestly would really like to return to this game and talk about the whole franchise in general. Maybe make the Sly Cooper retrospective video and go all over his major appearances. because boy howdy, there are some weird ones. But for now, this game is freaking phenomenal. For now, it's going to go in the B tier. There are definitely some flaws, and it's aged a little poorly in some places, but it holds up really well today. And I'm honestly leaving some room up in A tier in case I do go back and play some of the sequels. The PlayStation 2 is doing wonders so far. Can the others follow suit? (2002). I've got it. Ratchet and Clank was released to the world November 18th, 2002. And hey, would you look at that? The Insomniac guys are back. I thought they were pretty okay with Spyro, so I can only look up from here. Evidently, Insomniac wanted to make Ratchet and Clank for a few years during the development of Spyro. So let's just see what they were working on for all that time. The plot of this game follows this little bucket of bolts here named Clank, as he becomes birthed into the world by a conveyor line, only to find out that his creators plan on destroying countless planets and harvesting portions of their worlds to build one super world for their race, since they ran their original planet into the ground. Sound familiar? Clank ends up hijacking a fighter pilot and shooting off into space, where he crash lands onto this small little planet here and meets this, Lumbax by the name of Ratchet, a snarky budding teenage mechanic. Clank informs Ratchet that the universe is in danger, and they need to search for a superhero named Captain Cork, and inform him of Jeff Bezos' plans before it's too late. Ratchet agrees to help him out as long as Clank helps him activate his ship. The rest of the game follows the two hopping from planet to planet using their combined skills in pursuit of Cork, Bezos, and the betterment of the galaxy. This is a very rough summary of the plot of the game, as it's the most narratively driven game in the bunch so far. Spyro and Cratch's stories could be found on the back of cereal boxes, and while Sly had more detail, it was a very linear and simple at its core story. Ratchet and Clank plays more like a buddy cop sci-fi action adventure move. Yeah, so it turns out that Sony executives just loved these two characters so much, and the game's story, so they wanted to take a stab at a cinematic release of these characters, which went as expected. The concept of 3D animated revivals of old platformers like this is such a cool idea, but it's a thin line to balance. If you're going to go in with this strategy, you need to take a step with one of your larger IPs, like Mario, to find success. A game with somewhat of a cult following is going to be a bit more of a gamble. Alongside this movie's release, they thought they could come out with a full-blown HD recreation of the original game. Kind of. This game is wildly different from its source material. Sure, it follows the same general structure with its plot, locations, and gameplay, but it's pretty significantly different. To avoid developing a bias prior to playing the game, I did a bare minimum amount of research, but I listened to a few minutes of the video on screen, and it seems like the map designs, gameplay, and even the characterization of our main character are pretty heavily augmented, which can lead us down one of two paths. This means either the original had inherent flaws that they wanted to rewrite entirely, or the remake was being unfaithful to the source material, and was trying to heavily rebrand itself for the release of the movie. Which, on the subject, am I the only one that finds it a little bit weird of their strategy here? Part of me believes that Sony might have just tried to pull a fast one on younger audiences and parents, hoping to make them think, oh look, there's a video game for the movie we just saw. Better buy it for little Timmy 3 times. But with all this effort from Sony to rebrand the Ratchet and Clank franchise, then surely the original must have been worth all this hassle, right? Right? I think the game has a lot of great qualities to it. I think the buddy cop aspect of it really opens up the plot to a lot of unique level themes and locations to explore, and there's a boatload of unique and distinct character designs that look great on the hardware and make the world even more colorful and enjoyable to explore. And I think that cutscenes are very well animated for the time, and there's a good amount of them to keep you engaged. You also are provided with a pretty large amount of weapons to discover and purchase, to give you plenty of different options on tackling enemy encounters, busting up crates, and nabbing a bunch of bolts, which can be pretty satisfying. I do wish the bolts drew to you a little easier than they do already, but I know this gets improved in future games, so take it with a grain of salt. The game's story kept me thoroughly engaged for the first couple of hours, but it was around the halfway point when the game really started to lose me. A couple of hours into the game, you end up tracking down Quark, who you find out is more of a celebrity sellout rather than some galactic superhero. He tells the two that they have exactly what it takes to become heroes themselves and join the Hall of Heroes, but they're going to have to meet him at his secret hideout. which just so happens to be at the end of this ruthless obstacle course. That's a little bit goofy, but whatever it takes to be a hero, I guess. You slog through one of the hardest levels in the game and finally get to Clank. Clank is super eager to step forward into the Hall of Heroes, but Ratchet feels like something is off. Clank is a little bit too excited though and ends up pushing Ratchet forward. The two end up realizing that this is a trap and Quark is actually working for Spacos and was sent to take care of them once and for all. You fend off against some giant alien and escape the war zone. Yep, okay, here it is. According to my doctor, this is where the aneurysms began. After this story beat, for the next few hours, Ratchet is an insufferable prick to Clank!
Why don't you go help him? Into another trap.
I wonder what that infobot is for.
Maybe it can replace you. Put your hands down. You look ridiculous.
Destroyed every planet in the galaxy.
Well, I got bigger fish to fry.
Like, sure, Ratchet up to this point was kind of just along for the ride and served as this spunky cool teenager archetype. Alright, yeah, he uses guns. You actually know what sex is? But now he's just a bloodthirsty prick to hunt down Quark and is an absolute menace to Clank for the next 4 hours of the game. Like, yeah, of course Clank should have listened to Ratchet and actually heard him out before making the mistake, but it was an honest one. It's not like Clank was working with Quark to screw over Ratchet, and Ratchet does not let up on this at all and actively throws a bitch fit for the rest of the game. The two are actively traveling to Warzone planets where their home race is being blitzkrieged by the enemy invasion, and he is still throwing a goddamn fit about this little robot. Clank actively has to blackmail Ratchet into helping these war survivors. I understand that this is a buddy cop movie and all those movies usually have a fallout, but it's different when it's a 30-minute movie and 3 hours of a goddamn game. This just led me to being so fed up with the main character for hours at a time. I can see why the sequel wanted to re-characterize him as this more heroic character because he's just so goddamn insufferable here.
Hey Joe, buddy, we're about 3 pages into the script now. We have yet to talk about the game.
I'm getting to it! So the gameplay of Ratchet and Clank is pretty similar to what you'd expect from a game of the genre. You run around linear levels with occasional branching paths to beat down some baddies, nab some cash, and progress through the story. Except, unlike all the other video games we've covered thus far, the game doesn't present itself much like a video game. It doesn't have level complete animations and send you back to a hub world. Rather, when you've picked up what you need or progressed the story along, you run back to the start of the level, hop in your ship, and keep on going. You're even encouraged to return to most of these levels with future items, so you can explore and gain more goodies. These decisions are pretty damn smart, as it leads to the game feeling more like an open adventure, rather than, oh man, the beach level is already over? Where the game really tries to set itself apart is with the plethora of guns and gadgets you can use. Throughout the game, either on the ground or from shops, you'll find yourself obtaining a boatload of options to blast down whatever threat comes your way. These vary from flamethrowers to blasters and even more aneurysms, even vacuum guns. I thought there was only going to be like 4 or 5 of these things given the hotkey menu to equip them, but turns out there's a boatload of them, and you can customize your hotkeys to whatever weapons or tools you want at any moment. Gosh, this game sure is really forward thinking when it comes to its gun management. On top of the guns, you also have Ratchet's wrench, which can be used for better hand-to-hand combat. So the basic loop of the game is explore these giant intergalactic levels, blow up as much as you can with your tools of war, and gain upgrades along the way, right? Well, remember earlier when I said the game really hits a drag near the middle of the game? Well, it's about at this point as well where the game's controls and mechanics of the gameplay caught up with how bad the story was too. For starters, and most importantly, let's talk the guns! Almost every weapon you need in the game has ammo you need to keep track of. No worries, because you can buy ammo at these little store units. And there are plenty of ammo boxes scattered around the world too. Well, these shops are usually found at the beginning of a level or at the very least have huge gaps between them. Which means if you run out of ammo, you either need to make do with the wrench or find some ammo crates. In the early hours of the game, these are not too big of a deal. You only have 1 or 2 guns you really need to worry about. So you were always getting something you needed, and it was at a pretty consistent pace. Sure, you might need to upgrade your ammo once or twice, but it wasn't anything too crazy. But as you unlock more and more weapons, your spread of ammo you're retaining through natural means is getting spread thin. Instead of getting 4 things of ammo for your blaster, now you're getting 1 for your blaster, 2 for your bomb glove, and then 1 for your flamethrower, which eventually means you'll be using each weapon less, and you'll be having to swap more often, which is already a pain considering there's no quick swap button available to you. You gotta hold down the triangle button and wait wait for a circle to pop up. Then hold the analog stick in the direction of the weapon you have selected. And when you're running around and want to do this in a pinch, it's super slow and unintuitive. Reason number 2 why this system is awful: the goddamn controls. While you're running around and fighting large groups of enemies, you have one of 2 choices. Option 1, run around without aiming, spinning in circles, shooting and hoping to hit enemies around you, or get lucky enough that the auto lock feature works. Or number 2, stand perfectly still in third-person mode and aim your gun precisely at what you want to hit and pray you're close enough that the bullets actually connect. This is evidently one of the major improvements I've been able to gather that the remake adds to the game. I mean, I guess it's tolerable in the early game, but as you get later and later and the game expects more from you by throwing more tougher enemies at you, it just falls apart. Take this clip as an example. I turn a corner to see this flying UFO enemy. I don't have any ammo in my rocket launcher, so I have to run back and restock up my ammo. I then run back and have to slowly enter first-person mode, now aim my reticle and shoot the enemy down. But still, I take damage in the process because I'm not able to move and shoot. Now keep in mind, if there wasn't a retool box behind me, I would have had to literally run to the beginning of the level, get more ammo, then run back just for one enemy. You could also say, just use another gun. But hey, guess what? The other ranged options I had were also empty. Or the enemy was so far away that my bullets wouldn't even connect because the ammo fall off is insane in this game. Then finally you'd ask, why not just get one of the other guns in the shop we saw in that last clip? And that brings me to number 3, grinding. Yep, folks, you heard that right. Ratchet and Clank damn near requires you to grind for bolts and screws at every corner. In the first few levels of the game, there are several times you have to choose to buy weapons or not. I thought this was super fun at first. Being able to buy the key items or weapons I needed to progress in the moment gave me this really satisfying feeling of completion. But don't forget what game we're playing, folks. This is Ratchet and Clank, giving the term mid a whole new meaning. Because this system falls apart around, you guessed it, the middle of the game. God damn it, Ratchet and Clank. These necessary key items and upgrades are still barely affordable, but this also locks me out from buying any new weapons. And it also isn't always like this. I spent a good 15 minutes backtracking to get enough bolts to buy the grappling hook in the 2nd or 3rd stage. And I had to do it for this bit! So what are the options? A kid is playing this game and has to spend maybe an hour replaying through levels to get enough bolts as they can to progress if they spent too much money on ammo because they were struggling? Or they have enough money for the key items but not any for the weapons? And let's say they've died enough to replay the levels enough to get enough bolts to buy everything they need, they still are struggling to maintain ammo. Because if they have all the guns, that means their ammo spread is getting thinner and thinner. Moogle, can you believe this? Oh my god, please tell me we got that. The game honestly has a lot going for it. I like the way it presents its story, the constant upgrades to your arsenal are satisfying, and the varied level designs and characters are very interesting and keep me engaged for the majority of the game. And Moogle, listen to her. Yeah? What else? Do you like Ratchet and Clank? Sorry, Adam. It's just when I look at this game through a modern lens, the game design just feels counterintuitive to itself at every damn turn. Like, yeah, it's serviceable, it gets the job done, but I just don't think it holds up that well. And it just feels downright cheap in some sections. The game takes its hand at vehicle sections like the games prior from time to time, but they all just feel so clunky and needless. I mean, the text down display during some of these looks really damn cheap and low quality, and they just aren't fun. The game gets so lazy at one point where after this turret section you unlock a metal detector, which I'm assuming is to help with bolt farming, but it only gives you like 30 bolts at a time and you get it at the end of the game. But up to this point, every gadget or weapon you've gotten has given a small text box describing how it works. But for some reason, this putrid piece of metal was so intricate, they made a full-blown tutorial cutscene for it. Like, come on! I'm pretty sure a kid could figure out how to use a damn metal detector. Taking all this into consideration, I'm going to be putting Ratchet and Clank into D tier. The game has a lot of great things going for it, but when I compare it to the games in C tier, I could reasonably want to replay any of those, which I just don't feel the same about Ratchet and Clank. I'm sure the sequels are much better, and I know this game just probably has some growing pains, but for now, it's going in D tier. And that is Moogle's seal of approval. After years of working on the Crash Bandicoot series, putting out Crash 1, 2, 3, and Crash Team Racing, the folks down at Naughty Dog were ready to move on to their next project. So in December of 2001, their new franchise kicked off with Jak and Daxter, the Precursor's Legacy. Only 2 developers were originally allocated to the team, while the remaining members of Naughty Dog were still working on Crash Team Racing. The goal of the game was to break away from the traditions of Crash Bandicoot by making an open adventure game, with more of an emphasis on character-driven stories and exploration, rather than linear levels with little to no story. The game took 3 years to develop, and the freaks of nature at Naughty Dog developed a whole new programming language called Go. The language was so foreign to outside developers that Sony was originally displeased to find out how intricate it was. And it's for that very reason that Jak and Daxter and their trilogy of games are the only ones to ever use the Go language. Leave it to Naughty Dog to make an entire new programming language and then just never use it again. So with such a reputation on our hands, let's see how this legacy actually holds up.
It looks like your partner's doing all the work.
Maybe it looks that way to the untrained eye. Huh? Hey, big guy! Been there long?
The game follows 2 young boys, Jak and, you guessed it, Jill, as the game opens up with them sneaking out to the forbidden Misty Island. Jak's curiosity leads the 2 there and ends up discovering there's a group of evildoers on the island. In their attempts to escape the island, well, one thing leads to another, and Jill over here gets bumped into this pit of grape soda and gets spit out as this ferret named Daxter. What could have been? The 2 boys make it home to the island where they're lectured by the Green Sage about breaking the rules, and how if they want any chance of changing Daxter back into Jill, they're going to have to seek the Grey Sage's help, as he is the master of all things dark eco. That's the grape soda thing from earlier. When asking how to get there, the group is interrupted by the Green Sage's daughter, Kira, who says she's building a motorcycle that can take them where they need to go, but they need some power cells to power up the flame shield, as they need to go through an active volcano to get to the next stage. Kira tells the boys that there's plenty of power cells all over Sandover Village, and some villagers might be willing to give them some of their own. So the boys set off on an amazing adventure to get as many power cells as they can in hopes to cure Daxter. But before they can do that, the Green Sage instructs them to go into his portal to play a tutorial level. This is where my concerns really started to form. The tutorial plays a lot more like a Spyro level, an open but linear stage with a variety of collectibles to grab. Not that it would have been a bad thing if the game played like this, I was just kind of hoping for a change, and I was pleasantly surprised. While all the games we've covered today are of course 3D collectathon platformers, Jak and Daxter is the only one that is completely open world. Instead of having a plethora of linear stages, the game opts for less levels but larger and more open ones, with a bunch of objectives to complete in each. I know this might sound like a bit of a bizarre comparison, but I genuinely think this game is most comparable to Super Mario Sunshine. You have a large open connected world with a variety of different types of collectibles. One being the main collectible of the game, one where you must find 7 of them to unlock another main collectible, and a third that's scattered all over the levels, that when you collect enough of them, they can be purchased to buy 1 more of the main collectible. The comparisons don't stop there either. Like Super Mario Sunshine, these levels are genuinely super fun to explore and hunt for power cells in. The game has a lot of little things that come together to make this experience really damn enjoyable. The method of obtaining power cells is super varied, either getting them through platforming challenges, purchasing them from islanders, or specific niche tasks like pissing off seagulls until they cause a massive earthquake and shatter one down onto the beach. But unlike Super Mario Sunshine, where every time you nab a shine, you're forced to go back to the hub world, select a mission, and continue from the start of that level, Jak and Daxter keeps you going. Sure, they play a little quirky animation, but then you're back in the action. The game also has a healthy amount of mini-games and vehicle sections to break up the standard pace of gameplay. But I think the mini-games are handled a lot better and are more enjoyable in comparison to some of the others in the list so far. While there are very occasional one-off mini-games like fish catching and rodent blasting, this game really hates small creatures. The 2 reoccurring segments are the helicycle sections to get between parts of the island, and riding this little bird fella, kinda playing like a 3D Yoshi. He's super fast, has a bit of a flutter jump, and can break heavy boxes. Neither of these come up more than 2 or 3 times, but when they do, they're both incredibly fun to control and make for a great change of pace, especially the helicycle. It's a little clunky in some places, but you just move so fast, and the environments you're driving it around in are super cool. I also just think the act of exploring the island is super enjoyable as well. Sure, the level themes aren't exactly the most inspired in some places, but between the game's varied mission objectives, the freedom to do them in any order you please, and the added detail that the game has a built-in day and night cycle, it just keeps it really fresh. The levels also don't hardcore lock you into playing through them in one specific way. There were so many times during the Spider Cave and Ice Fortress sections where I used a combination of the super jump and long jump to get to portions of the level I had no business being in at that point. Speaking of moves, while you don't get any upgrades throughout your journey, you have a lot of options at your disposal. You have, of course, the double jump, long jump, and super jump, but you also have a few forms of attacking: punching, ground pounding, and of course, the Naughty Dog classic, spinning. While I at first thought this was really funny given their previous work with Crash and maybe a quirk of their game development, but having the option between a fast punch that launches you forward and a slow area spin made for a great variety. Especially when I found out I could jump out of my punch for an uppercut, then do an air spin on the way down. This isn't any DMC by any means, but I appreciate the options in my attack. I think the characters are also handled pretty damn well here. Daxter is a narcissistic little prick who won't ever shut up, but it's never to the point where it becomes annoying.
It's just waiting for some brave adventurer to find.
Well, we've got the brave adventurer at least.
And Jak is a bit of an arrogant yet well-meaning silent protagonist. Out of the 3 PS2 platformer mascots, Jak feels the least aimed at the audience with the gritty trends at the time. However, I do know he learns to speak and becomes a bit of a brooding asshole in the sequels.
Hey there, tough guy.
I think they torture him for 2 years? But we're not going to talk about that Jak in this video. Though, if you'd also like a Jak and Daxter retrospective video, maybe let me know by commenting in the comments below. However, despite all these upsides, the game does have a few snags along the way. For starters, the game is unfortunately pretty dated. The draw distance can be a little bit noticeable at times, and while frame drops weren't crazy consistent, it did happen in some sections. The combination of the camera being not too great and the frame spikes were really making the final boss 3 times harder than it had any right to be. But hey, what do I know? Maybe the developers were big braining me and making it intentionally bad on purpose. Speaking of the camera though, it is unfortunately pretty weak. You're locked into inverted controls with no way of reversing it. This combined with its pretty slow pace of following you in some places can make the platforming a bit lax. And finally, and most egregiously, the double jump. The double jump in Jak and Daxter is the most shoddy I've ever had in a platformer. Not only is it incredibly weak, adding the bare minimum to your height, but I swear half the time it doesn't even trigger. Your window for activating it is really freaking tight, and there were countless times I just plummeted because the jump didn't come out properly. It's honestly not too terrible, it gets the job done and I work around it, but this mainly came from wanting to rely on my super jump and air spin. But other than that, it just did get annoying in some places. Oh, so basically Jak and Daxter go and find out the reason the other sages weren't opening their portals in the beginning was because the 5th sage actually got corrupted by the dark eco and now is super evil, has a hot girlfriend, and wants to destroy the world, and has kidnapped all the other sages including the green one. And you free each sage one at a time, lending their power to you in the final fight to create the holy white eco. The eco can either power up Jak to defeat the baddies for good, or be used to cure Daxter of, well, being Daxter. The rodent decides it's better to save the world than downgrade back to a weasel boy, and the two beat down the robots once and for all. I'm just saying, can we get a round of applause for our true hero, Daxter? Yeah, alright, fuck yeah. Let's go, Daxter. You've earned it. With one final kiss to seal off the game. Hey, what the fuck, Daxter? Nuh-uh, I'm revoking your round of applause. With a hint of a sequel and an encouragement to 100% the game, it wraps up. The game honestly was just the definition of charming to me. The amount of care that went into the level design, the character animations, the voice acting, and general flair. Like, this game came packaged with a poster of not only the characters, but the whole map itself. Now's also a good time to mention because I didn't really know where to put it in any other spot of the video, and it's not really affecting the ranking of the list, but for some reason Jak and Daxter was the only game I played on PlayStation Now that not only allowed me to download the game directly to my console rather than streaming it, but also had Steam achievements and a digital copy of the manual built into the PlayStation portfolio. That's not really important. I just thought it was neat. The game just feels so infinitely replayable. Like, I replayed through the first 20 minutes of the game to capture the footage for Adam, since I played the game primarily after work, and I honestly felt compelled to just keep playing through the game again. Why does every YouTube reviewer under the sun sing SpongeBob Battle for Bikini Bottom's praises when you've essentially got the same game right here? Yeah, I'll say it. Jak and Daxter are both stuck in SpongeBob's shadow. Well, I suppose a lot of things are. I went back and forth on where I really wanted to put this game, and I'm gonna have to put it in A tier. I just ended up enjoying it a hell of a lot more than I thought I would. It's super enjoyable to play, it's short, it only takes around 8 hours to beat, the music and world is really colorful. I'll be damned. Way to go, Jak and Daxter. I'm sure your future is, gonna be really bright. And with that, we've taken a stab at one game from each of the major PlayStation platformers. I know I missed a few notable ones like Rayman and Little Big Planet, but I assure you, this isn't the last time I have to cover platformers. We'll swing back for them later. As for my thoughts, I'm pretty pleasantly surprised. Going in, I was so ready to be feeling pretty neutral on all of these games. After Spyro and Crash, I started to fear maybe I could only really enjoy these games if I played them like a kid, like I did with Nintendo games. And while I fully believe I would have adored all of these games even more if I played them in my youth, I still think they were a pretty good time. Even my least favorite game of the group still had a lot of redeeming qualities to it. The biggest shockers to me were no doubt Sly Cooper and even more Jak and Daxter. I genuinely would love to continue diving into these series and cover them up at length. If that's something you would be interested in, please let me know. These were probably the first 2 games I played on the list that really made me feel like I discovered a new franchise that I wanted to jump into. But I really think we should just take a moment to applaud these game developers. It's really easy for some video games of that era to be dated and forgotten due to the changing times and trends. And while of course some of these games would grow to cater to some of these trends, I still feel like most of them age pretty damn well. And they've built massive followings behind them, and have pretty active fan bases to this day. And that's honestly really worth commending. Needless to say, I genuinely believe all of these games deserve to be a part of this series. Cheers to you, PlayStation platformers. Except you, Ratchet. You can fuck right off.